So we'll just go down the row, have you guys introduce yourselves, tell us what company you're with and what you're working on.
I'm McNeill. I'm a solo indie developer here in San Diego. I've been making games for VR since the Oculus Rift Kickstarter stuff came through. I did a VR jam, an Oculus-sponsored game jam, really early on, mid-2013, and have been doing VR full-time since. So I have 2 games right now that are launched. The first one is called Darknet. It's a cyberpunk hacking game, and that came out at the end of 2014 for the Gear VR when it was the Innovator Edition, and is now out for Oculus Rift. And then more recently, I came out with Tactera, which is a tabletop real-time strategy game in VR, and that came out for the Gear VR and should be coming out to Oculus Rift. Both of those games hopefully will be coming out to Daydream and Vive and maybe even PSVR eventually when I get my act together. And I have a 3rd game in the works which should be announced tomorrow, but you guys can get a sneak peek of a few hours. The game is called Skylight, and it's a turn-based tactics game of space battles in VR. So it's sort of like a big Star Wars battle if the protagonist were Admiral Akbar instead of Luke Skywalker. You're sort of coordinating your fleet trying to defeat the other side.
That's great.
Hi, I'm Jason. I work with Steve and John and Salim over there at Rank 17. We're building out a bunch of VR games. Right now we have 2 up in the Steam store and another 5 in development. We're primarily targeting the room scale devices, so HTC Vive, the Oculus Touch, and then PlayStation ports on a couple of them. And then in addition to that, I run the site unity3d.college, which is just a learning resources type site for Unity developers.
My name is Keita. I was supposed to be on the previous panel, but Steve and I switched. So I work for Nanome. We make a design software that utilizes VR as an interface for nanoscale design and modeling and simulation. So that's pretty much an intro for me. The reason why we switched is because he's a CEO, visionary, figured VR apps and why he's doing that would be better. Also, I lead a team of about 22 people building this design software right now, which is why I figured the development would be better for me. So that's why we switched.
Nice, I love it. Thank you for switching it around. Right on. E, you've been doing this for a while, and you've been iterating and iterating and iterating. Natively in VR, so you're very, very familiar of the challenges. So if you could kind of give us your, kind of a macro level of what you've learned over the years of developing for VR, like what are the challenges? What are some takeaways?
You really set expectations for me there. That's a big question. A lot of the time when giving advice about VR game development, it ends up reverting to just advice about game development. I've always found that the game part is way more difficult than the VR part. And there's a lot of sort of things to watch out for, or, unique problems that you have to focus on, like dealing with the 3D stereoscopic effect and handling UI in VR and dealing with nausea. I find that those are problems that you can solve and leaves you with much bigger problems that you have to deal with when developing any game. And the process of solving those problems is by and large the same between those 2 areas, which is, as you said, iteration. So I think you try out a lot of different things. You look at what other people are doing. You sort of just try to build prototypes in VR, or just try to go on like a mind trip in VR and just imagine what it would actually feel like to have stuff in front of you, and then see what you can turn up with. So like in Darknet, this was sort of one of the very first wave of commercial VR games on the market, and I had a lot of UI in that game. And one of the things that seemed kind of cool to me was I had these very long panels that were much taller than you were, that were filled with text and buttons and things like that. And if you're looking straight at them, they would be stationary and you could read it and interact with it. If you looked up, then it would scroll down slowly. And if you looked down, it would scroll up slowly. And depending on the angle that you were looking. And so you could sort of if you needed to see something way down at the bottom, you just look at it and it would suddenly be summoned right in front of you, just through your gaze. I thought that was really cool. It was something, you know, it was one of a couple ideas I had, and I've just played around with them. It felt good, and it went into the game. And no one else has used that since, so I might be the only person who likes that idea. But I felt like it worked pretty well, and it's something that I would use again in other VR games. And that's just something that came from, brainstorming, trying stuff out, and iterating until it felt good.
Jason, when you are looking at educating other people, right, and you always have to kind of keep your eye on the future and what's coming down the pike and what's the next thing. So what changes do you see kind of in the future of VR development, and even when we're talking about different types of data input, what do you see in the near future, perhaps?
Oh, okay. So I guess for the near future, I think I'm thinking more long term. I think that the devices are going to change a lot. Right? They're going to get smaller. They're going to be totally mobile and have the tracking. Kind of what Daydream's got going on.
Maybe like 12 months. You know what I mean? Like maybe, so not like in 10 years, but maybe more like a 12-month outlook, perhaps.
Right. I don't think much is going to change in the next 12 months beyond just Daydream coming out and having the kind of basic motion control.
Talk about Daydream then.
I don't know enough about it to talk about in detail, but I know. So the idea is being somewhat similar to the Gear VR, but with actual motion control, which is going to make it a whole lot better than the Gear VR. Right, like right now using a little gamepad or the touch thing is kind of terrible, and I think there are a lot of opportunities for that. I was talking to the MLB guys, and they're doing a home run derby kind of game with that, and I'm probably going to just port mine over to Daydream too, because I think it'll be a pretty big win. It's going to be a huge market, and there's not a whole lot of people out there working on it, at least that I've seen. But other than that, I think the general PC VR stuff isn't going to change too much. The PlayStation VR has the potential to be a huge disruptor. It may be a total flop too. It's kind of up in the air right now. I'm hoping it's a huge thing and port a lot of stuff over, and it's a big success though.
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's Keita? Keita, thank you. Can you tell us what are some of the challenges that you've come across so far when you're developing, and then maybe some takeaways on your end of things?
Sure. So for us, a lot of the computational hard work for us in terms of the simulation has already been done. We're using a lot of open source software for the simulation itself. So we really see ourselves, or I really see ourselves as kind of like an interface company that really utilizes, these different tools like VR, different tools, down to the controller. Are we using our hands? Are we using a different type of tool? And so the biggest challenge I feel like has been really deciding from the overabundance of choices that we have because of what possibilities VR comes with. So I guess the first example, or I guess kind of a technical example that I could come up with right now is that with Unity, of course, you can make 3D objects, you can make beautiful looking menu systems just within Unity. But then there's also stuff like assets that you can download, like Chromium asset within Unity. And so what that means is for us, in order to interface with a lot of the databases that are currently out there, a lot of these databases are actually already websites, like the Protein Databank or the Materials Database. And so in order to interface with that, we can either make our own menu system from scratch with Unity, or we could just make Chromium, we could just download a Chromium asset from the App Store. There's a great one, by the way. And so we're right now deciding on how exactly the hybrid system of kind of like a Chromium-based menu UI and a 3D Unity-based UI will interact. And so, and of course, we went through different iterations of the control itself. Do we use a hand? Do we use a tool? And so those are kind of the challenges that we've been overcome. And the solution, to answer your question for and because how awesome Unity is to literally just rapid prototype. Make whatever you're gonna had initial thoughts for, and then just make Peter Thiel has that book, 0 to 1, and really that's the hardest part is just going to 1. The 0.1 iteration, like you got to make that in order to get to 0.2 and 0.3, and then eventually to 1.0. But if you're stuck at 0.0 and you're just thinking about, oh crap, I could go here, 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 what do I do? Then that's like a challenge in and of itself. So just getting to 0.1 has been the solution.
Thank you. Darknet and Tactera, they've been around for a while and they're really well known and they're really well liked. So when you're looking back on those two, what have now kind of become iconic games, really, they really have. What are some of the most surprising things to you about people's reactions, or perhaps something unexpected, or maybe something that's been really fulfilling for you from having these games in front of people and being a developer who got in so early and has created some really beautiful stuff?
I don't know if they've reached an iconic status yet. I remember the first time I talked with anybody at Oculus, I talked about my vision for Darknet, and I think I said I wanted it to be the Halo of VR. And I don't think I quite got there, but I feel good about it. I feel like for a project that was made by one person, it's done pretty well and is well received. So there were a couple different parts to your question. I don't know if I can answer all of them, but when I think about them, again, I'm thinking of them sort of as games first and as VR projects second. And the feeling I have towards them is for Darknet, it was something that I took a lot of time with. I had a very long period of ideation and brainstorming and iteration. For a long time, the puzzles in the game, which are kind of the core unit of gameplay, worked very differently and were very bad.
How long was the ideation process for you?
The ideation process was probably about, I don't know. Some elements were there from the very beginning. It was just like I started on the game with this idea that's been floating in my head for a long time. And that was like, I spent 3 weeks doing a game jam version of the game. And that was, it didn't have any of the same gameplay, but it had sort of the same structure and the same setting and some things like that. It was probably about 6 months from that point before the scope of the game and the features were set. It was probably about another 6 months after that when I finally figured out how the gameplay worked, by which I mean finally revised the puzzles to the point where they were fun to play. I was kind of in denial about how good it was up to that point. And then I felt good about it, and the rest was just sort of finishing the game and putting it out in the world for about another 6 months. So it was about a year and a half of work, and it was, I feel like that's a game where it was not obviously part of any genre. It was not obviously related to or a copy of any other game. And in that respect, I felt very proud of it. I felt like this was innovative and it was good, and even if it's hard to describe and sell and things like that, this is a piece of art that I can really love. Tactera was more conventional, and I think I sort of had this feeling that the iron was hot in VR, and so I had to strike now. And so I used some of the technology that I had used previously in Darknet. I made this very simplified RTS game, and there were some interesting game design challenges, but it is clearly a more conventional game. An RTS genre is an established thing. It follows some of those conventions. The unit types in the games of the troops that you command are all sort of iconic, recognizable things. So I feel good about the game, and it was easier to talk about and probably easier to sell, but it was probably about a year of work, and it was a little less fulfilling for me personally. I shouldn't be saying this in public. I've kind of continued that trend with my new game, where it is an even faster development cycle. And again, there's sort of interesting things going on in the game design, but a lot of those are actually copied from a prototype that I made back in college. So, I guess it's still my original work, but it's not original work that I'm doing right now. A lot of the technology is borrowed from Tactera. And so again, it's sort of this strike while the iron is hot business philosophy, but I have less time to develop the game and let it marinate and iterate and turn into something really special, like I feel Darknet was. And I'm more than halfway through Skylight right now, but I feel like after this is done, I'm going to want to put on the brakes for a little while and not try to just like get out more VR games really quickly, but maybe not start another project for a few months until I feel like I've really got something special I can really turn into something that's artistically fulfilling as well as a smart entry into the market. I don't remember what your question was at this point, but I hope I answered it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Jason, I want to ask you kind of briefly, what's the future of Unity? You guys are doing awesome stuff and really getting into the hands of people so they can design and develop and create beautiful things in the world. You guys got a great round of funding recently. I think it was like 80, no? It's
I
Unity
actually
College, right?
don't work with Unity.
And so, but you're with Unity 3D College.
Yeah, that's just my website.
But yeah. So what? All right. Then what's the
Totally
future
unrelated.
for you, Jason?
It just happened to be available, and I was building a website to teach people how to use Unity, and snagged it. So
Nice.
yeah, but they do have a lot of cool stuff coming
Well,
out.
how do we get it in more
people?
people's hands, right?
It's hard to say. I think it's already kind of happening. Like there's over 1.5 million developers in there every month, just building stuff, and they've been making it so easy to get started. I mean, if you want to start with a VR project, you can check a box and your game just runs in VR. And then same with like Steam and Valve, or I guess same company, right? They released the Steam VR stuff. If you guys haven't played with Unity at all, grab Unity, grab the Steam VR plugin, if you have a Vive or an Oculus with the touch, and just drop it in there, and you're up and running, with no code in 30 seconds. It just drops right in and works. I was going to say something else, and I totally forgot what it was.
Well, if someone wants to get started, obviously check out your website, right? How do they get started, and how do they get their feet wet? How do you kind of guide them through that sort of first portal?
Right. So what I've been doing is just writing a lot of tutorials and kind of step-by-step process of building out the basics. With Unity, the main thing you need to learn is the editor. The coding part is smaller. Coding is important, but it's a lot less important than just kind of figuring out your way around the editor and finding out all of the things that are available. Most of the stuff that you do can be done with no code. I've released some games on Steam with maybe less than 1,000 lines of code. The baseball game I did is I think 500 lines of code total. Yeah, it's awesome, just works, and just learning to use the editor. And then I've got some tutorials up there that actually show a lot of the stuff that was done to build that. And that was actually, to be honest, I started that game as a tutorial. I was just going to write a tutorial. I got my Vive, and I was like, okay, I'm going to spend the weekend and convert this Gear VR tutorial into a Vive tutorial. And it took about 2 hours to make the conversion. And then I let my wife try it, and she really loved it. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll try making this into a game, and then launched it like a week and a half later. So it's
Awesome. Will you tell people your website so that they can go and check it out?
Yeah, unity3d.college.
Thank you. And then .college. Keita, when you're managing a team of developers and you're telling them, you're giving them best practices, best advice, like what are some of the things that you tell your team about best practices and then how to construct a good game mechanic?
First of all, I think going back to what I said before, rapid iteration, see what works, see what doesn't. Second, Steam VR, a lot of their assets are just like very straightforward, and I love. I'm sure you're familiar with like the test throw scene, and like just right-clicking on the scripts, and like, oh, okay, this is how I interface with the controllers and all that. And then of course the best practices that I'm very proud of my company that we do is literally download every single game out there and just like study the crap out of every single game that's out there, because we're huge fans of Cosmic Trip and Space Pirates and all the classic games that are out there. And the reason why that we made the decisions that we did is because some of these rapid iterations were done by other people. And so by studying the, quote unquote best practices by looking at the existing software that's out there, and then of course updating it along with other updates, like Tarantino says, he just rips every single favorite movie that he likes, right? So kind of like taking that philosophy into VR and then really kind of just ripping every single piece. Oh, I love the Cosmic Trip menu. I love the quick menu of Space Pirates. Like, boom, awesome. Put it together, see what works. I feel like and then really just so, constantly kind of like perpetuating that company culture of being able to play those games whenever you want to and stuff. I think our team really likes that. So.
Sounds like you guys have a terrible time.
It's
no
awful.
fun. No fun at all. Yeah. Awesome. Keita, Jason, E, thank you so much. Give them a big round of applause, guys.